what does it mean to love yourself, and not just through an affirmation, I love myself, through the mind, through bypassing yourself, but to actually create self love at a very deep level. What does it mean to meet your needs, to feel your emotions, even when they're super overwhelming, to find safety within yourself and regulate your nervous system? All these beautiful things Karina and I discussed today. And it was just such a joy, such a pleasure. I love when I get to interview someone that I feel such deep alignment and resonance with. So I know you're going to have a lot of takeaways from this one. I actually found her on her from her YouTube channel, and she records the most brilliant practices, somatic practices that you can follow along there, which I highly recommend. So dive into this and then please head over there and practice with her. I really feel like it's going to change your life. Hello, hello. I'm so happy to have you here. And as you know, I found you through, well, I think Instagram first, but then I really love the practices that you upload to YouTube. And so I'm so excited to talk to you about so many topics. And I think
Yeah.
the first question that I love to ask is, how did you get into this work?
Yeah. I think I got into the work as a lot of people do by kind of crashing and burning.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
I was one of those people in a really solid functional freeze for a long time, just, completely absorbed with anxiety and self-judgment and self-hatred and, looking pretty functional on the outside, able to go about my day, but on the inside just feeling so chaotic and so dysregulated, although I didn't know the word dysregulation back then. Um, so yeah, because of the discomfort of my inner world, I was always seeking. I was always seeking. I tried so many things, like therapy and yoga and meditation. And I found some beautiful gifts here and there, that really helped me come into relationship with myself in a gentler way. But it wasn't until I found like some really deep somatic emotional processing tools that I was actually able to bring down my anxiety, quiet that self judgment, like actually make tangible shifts in feeling better in my body, in my psyche, and come out of that state of freeze, anxious judgment that was happening all the time inside. um so yeah, that is I mean, that's a very general story, but in general, I find a lot of people find their way to the somatic work in a similar way, where like they're pretty functional, probably, or maybe not, but but something on the inside is so uncomfortable and so many things have failed them, like because there's so many things out in the world that don't necessarily help you get to the very tender and real roots of what you're struggling with.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned this term functional freeze. Can you
Mhm.
share what did that feel like in your body? And what do you feel like created that in your life?
So functional freeze to me, while the emotions of it were often like overwhelm and shame, like it felt a lot like hopelessness too sometimes. So that was the emotional feeling of it. But the general experience of it was like having all these like desires of who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do in the world, but having zero motivation, zero energy, and also having like a really big split between like who I was out facing, in the world, and then who I felt like on the inside. Because I don't think many people would have been able to recognize how much I hated myself or how anxious I was. I mean, obviously, it would squirt out sideways as the repressed things within us do, and so the people close to me I think could have known some of those things, but yeah, there was a really big rift between like my inner and outer experience of life, and that freeze just really felt like rigid, cold, stuck, no motivation, no energy, that sort of thing.
Hmm. So on
Yeah.
the outside, you seemed like very functional. You had a job, you had like a functioning life, and on
Yep.
the inside, it was just chaos.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And what do you feel like led you there? And I know that's like a big question, but
Yeah.
I'm sure there's childhood things and other things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I'll go a little more general than specific just so I don't get completely lost in the weeds, but I think that there was just such a sense in my life when I was little, and through even, my early adulthood and stuff, that you just had to keep going. You just have to keep going. Like it doesn't matter what you feel, it doesn't matter if you're suffering, it doesn't matter, like you just push that down, you push that down, you push that down, right? And of course that is, I mean, that works to some degree. Like to some degree, I could burn myself out, like trying just to go, 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 go. And it makes a lot of sense culturally for like how I was raised and that sort of thing, where I spent a lot of time in a very hyper vigilant state, kind of monitoring other people's emotions, other people's well-being at the complete expense of my own, like my needs, feelings and desires didn't have any importance. It felt like, and I was always doing this sort of external monitoring of other people's volatility and that sort of thing. And so I think that there's just a combination of reasons why I could fake it. Like I could fake it just fine, but on the inside, the wounds, the needs, the depth of my feeling and all that kind of stuff was just completely abandoned, completely neglected. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's a generic story in some ways, but that's probably how I got there. Also, just living in a dysregulated culture that, has a lot of different levels of trauma, personally and collectively.
Yeah. Yes, I relate to every word.
Yes.
um, and it really screams the word inauthenticity to me. And sometimes I feel
Totally.
like, right? I feel like people really kind of demonize it like, oh, you're a fake person. But inauthenticity can also be like, I'm not able to be myself in this world, in this context, in this
Hmm.
culture, in this relationship. Can you talk about that a bit?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really, really honest that I was not being authentic. And I don't even know if I could have told you what authentic was like about me. You know what I mean? Honestly. But I love how you framed it in a compassionate view because these are all self protective strategies. Like being a human is hard. And we're all kind of like doing the best we can. And a lot of us are having some level of masking just to make it through, like just to feel safe. Right. And so, with any self protective strategy, with every self protective strategy, like there is wisdom beneath it. It is how you learned often at a very, very young age how to survive, how to get by in your environment. Um, and so the deep level of confusion that for me existed beneath that inauthenticity was very honestly born, from me trying to be a good girl and me trying to, just not, I don't know, not get attacked, not, like all these things I was trying to protect myself from by disconnecting from my authenticity. But even, again, I think I already said it. I don't even think I could have told you what I was authentically needing or feeling a long time ago. And that I'm not judging myself in any way for that, like that's just real. That's how it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also feel like, I wonder if you agree with this, like in the personal development world, we tend to demonize the masks and just say, oh, well, get rid of this. And there's still like something, a lot of light and something really helpful about being productive, for example, about
Yeah.
masks. Like, we don't want to be vulnerable with every person in our life. Like, some people, it's like,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah,
Yeah.
curious if you can speak to that nuance that I think is really beautifully present more in the somatic world.
Yeah. Totally. Well, I think there is a level of discernment of how vulnerable and authentic do you want to be in any given relationship. Like we may not be consciously navigating that, but we are somatically navigating that. We're subconsciously navigating that, right? Like there are relationships that I'm in out of necessity in life, just because the world is what it is, where I'm probably not going to show my most vulnerable insides. And that would be an appropriate discernment. Um, and I'm not even saying that I'm 100% authentic in other relationships all the time either, because I think that's a nuanced thing that I'm continuing to grow into and continuing to ground into and continuing to know. And I think that will maybe be a lifelong process of nuanced growth into my most authentic embodiment or whatever. So yeah, I think that when we come at it from a really compassionate perspective, there's space for everything, and any part of ourselves that we demonize is likely to be, a part that then sticks around even more. So like the demonizing of the self-protective strategies or the demonizing of the masks, like I understand it, I've done it, but ultimately it doesn't really serve my healing journey, and it often just causes us to shove more stuff into the subconscious, which then our body has to kind of like navigate around.
Yeah, I love that. Ah, I feel like we're so aligned. Um, what is the process from your own example? I mean, your own life, your clients, what you see of unmasking. Like, it's pretty terrifying. There's a reason why these masks give us safety and why we need them, why we have them. What is the
Totally.
process of like taking them off?
Yeah. Well, so one analogy that really speaks to me is like if you had broken your leg and you had a crutch, like you wouldn't yank the crutch away when your leg was still broken and judge the crutch or you judge yourself for using it, right? Like that would be inappropriate. And our self-protective strategies are similar to that. Like there may be a part of us that still needs it sometimes, and that is fine. And so the process is one that feels really, really deep and meaningful to me of like, we can see the usefulness of the self protective strategy. The more we understand it with compassion, the more we allow it, the less it's going to be unconsciously in control of our lives, first of all. And again, usually these self protective strategies were formed when we were very young, and they hold a lot of wisdom, right? And so coming into relationship with our self protective strategies in an accepting and loving way actually helps them transform way more than fighting against them and judging them. And then secondarily, like look at the broken leg, right? Like what is it protecting? Because what is beneath that are very real, vulnerable, and wounded parts of our psyches, right? And we all have that. We all have these pieces that are still stuck in some past pain or are still very confused or still feel ashamed or whatever. So normalizing that we all have those wounded parts, those confused parts, those parts that maybe we feel ashamed of or whatever, that's likely underneath the self-protective strategy. And that's ultimately the part that we want to create more support for and more relationship with.
I love that. It makes me think about compassion for others. And
Mm,
I wonder what your approach is to that, because I think in my own journey, my tendency is to be overly compassionate, where it becomes
mhm.
very toxic. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious about that for you.
Yeah, it is such a good question. So, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is that the more I'm authentically compassionate to all my parts as best as I can, which is completely imperfect, of course, but the more I just naturally hold compassion for others. Like I think that that is like the truest truth around compassion for me is like the more I actually practice it moment by moment with myself, the more I can hold it for other people because yeah, authentic compassion does need to have some boundaries, and it does need to have some like edges and some containment, right? Because if it's just completely um unbounded, perhaps we end up as a doormat, right? Or perhaps we end up in a severe overgiving and burnout or whatever, and so then when I think of the doormat stuff and when I think of the overgiving, which I've definitely done, I also think of anger. Like for me, learning to own my anger, feel my anger, and validate like that that's real within me, which was not part of my good girl programming, But that is a part of me that I've had to re-own to find my boundaries because I feel like one function of healthy anger in our system is to tell us that we deserve better and to tell us when there's been a boundary violation or something. So I don't know, maybe anger and compassion are related in that way.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that. Yeah. So you mentioned in a sentence feelings and needs, and those are like my two favorite topics right now. What is
Yeah.
the relationship between them?
Well, I mean, they're interrelated, I would say, in probably like a million different ways. Like when we drop into our subconscious self, into the deeper layers of our psyche that are held in our bodies, everything is like holistically interrelated. And it's hard to tease them apart. Like when I'm working with clients, we'll talk about feelings and needs and feelings. And it kind of just, like one informs the other and they're deeply interconnected. So I'm not sure if I even could tease them apart, honestly. Um, but one thing I like to talk about with feelings and needs is that they're real. Like, I feel like we've grown up, or at least I did, in a culture where it was so invalidated. Like, needy was so bad. It was such a bad thing to be, But like,
Don't have needs. Just have zero needs and then you're good. Like you be a good child, you'll be a good person, right?
right, totally, totally a good woman. Yeah, there's all sorts of silly conditioning around that I feel like I spend a lot of time working with in my own system and even with my clients, right? That like when we feel those needs or we feel those feelings, oftentimes then there's like a secondary judgment or a secondary resistance or shame or, dysregulation of some sort because we've been taught that feelings and needs are negative or should be judged or make us weak or something like that. And so a lot of the somatic work that I do is about reclaiming that it's real and valid and learning how to listen to those feelings and needs.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. So for someone who literally has no clue that they have needs, like what even are they? I've been that person. I'm a recovering
Totally.
person. So
Totally.
where would someone like that begin that journey?
Yeah. Well, so everything for me begins with beginning to feel your body and listen to your body because your body is authentically giving you feedback when you're overriding your needs. And we have learned to numb that. We have learned to ignore that. We've learned to vilify that. Like there's all sorts of other layers there, but it's still happening. Like whether we're ignoring it or not. Like that's what I always talk about when I talk about feelings because people are like, should I really feel this? And it's like, you are feeling it. Like even if you're ignoring it, even if you don't want to be feeling it, like it exists there. And like that is actually one of my definitions of authenticity is like what is real and here right now, like authentically here. So it's a journey, to reconnect to what we feel. It can be a journey to reconnect with our needs. But they still exist within and they are still giving you feedback, whether you feel irritated, whether you feel dissociated, whether you go snap at someone, whether like there's lots of ways that your body and even your deep inner wisdom is giving you feedback on what your needs are and how you might be missing them. It takes practice, and to me that's actually like my favorite part of somatic healing is learning to listen to what's true and real within us.
What are some of the signals that we should pay attention to kind of help us feel into what we need?
Yeah, that that is a great question. I feel like it could be anything, like anything that helps or that makes you feel like you're not really meeting yourself where you are. And so there's even like many, many nuanced levels to that. Like maybe on like a very superficial thing, it's just like you're always feeling anxious or you're always keeping yourself busy or you're always keeping yourself distracted. Like that's a pretty common one that I see for a lot of us. And then there's like deeper and deeper levels. Like for me, my right shoulder and my right jaw will begin to ache. And, a few years ago, I probably wasn't even noticing that my shoulder and jaw would ache. Like this is a more nuanced sign before I'm crabby, before I'm like so stressed, I just want to cry and yell, right? Like my jaw and my shoulder begin to ache. So there are lots of signs. Um, but yeah, I feel like it's kind of a nuanced journey to learn how to listen at even a more refined level and even a more refined level. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with you because I think there's like these layers that we keep peeling off because for me, like I couldn't feel my body at all. That was the
Mm-hmm.
starting point. It was like total numbness, freeze,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
dissociation, really. And then like, oh, I have sensations. Oh, I have emotions. Oh, I have needs. Like that's been like the third layer. And I'm sure there's going to be many more for every
Yeah.
part, right? So yeah, absolutely. And then when we're in relationships, how does that impact our own relationship to our own needs?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, one of my biggest reflections about relationships is that we'll never really feel seen or we'll never really feel loved and supported if we don't feel seen and heard and attuned to, and that goes for our relationship with ourselves and that goes with our relationship with everyone. And so I think when we learn how to attune to our needs more and more, then we can always communicate them more clearly. And then, of course, we still need to be in relationship with someone who's safe to communicate to and who can listen to that. Like it's always a reciprocal thing in relationships. But for me, it really does start with me knowing what I need, being honest with that, and not realizing like 5 days later that I'm just super resentful,
Yeah.
because I overran that need a long time ago or whatever. So yeah, it's a nuanced thing, and relationships have so many variables. But again, like for me, the road to healing comes back to deep listening to what's real and true within me, because then I can support me differently and I can ask for support or express my need for support in a different way.
Yeah. And I know you talk a lot about clarity, and you just mentioned that. And I think that is
Mhm.
so important to talk about because a lot of times we might feel completely unheard, but we actually weren't communicating clearly. But the problem, the root is not in our words, I think. So I'm curious how you see
Mm.
that.
Yeah. So are you saying that the root is like in our lack of clarity before the words or what? Yeah.
Yeah, and then like I would say like the childhood trauma that makes us really jumbled and feel
Mm.
like we invalidate ourselves. And then of course I'm coming through as like a 2-year-old. Like a lot of times my therapist, who's actually an IFS therapist, will say
Uh-huh.
like, were you communicating as an adult or as a 5-year-old? And when a 5-year-old
Yeah.
communicates, you're like, I mean, what's the 5-year-old saying? Like, I can't really understand, so I can't really help you out here.
Totally, totally. Yeah, no, I think that that makes so much sense because our communication space is like conditioned by what we grew up in, right? And what we think is safe on a deep implicit level, like not what we just think is safe in our heads, right? Like what felt safe when we were little. And we're always kind of looking at the world through those implicit narratives of how we were received when we were really young, right? And we can, of course, rewrite that, and a lot of us are, but it will still be our default when we're really dysregulated or when we're stressed or, when we're outside of our window of tolerance or whatever, right? So, yeah, we will communicate through those young versions of ourselves from time to time. um, and yeah, I mean, the clarity piece for me really is like when we drop into our bodies, when we drop into what we feel inside, when we come into relationship with what's actually going on inside, we begin to unearth the wounds, of course, that are there, that have been waiting, that want to be known, that want to be helped, that want to be supported and integrated and loved and that kind of stuff. But we also drop into this deep wisdom, right? Like there's not only the wounds, there's also this deep knowing that aligns with your heart, that aligns with your guts, that aligns with your soul, you know. So the clarity for me is also grown by learning to feel my feelings, by learning to know what my needs are and that kind of stuff. Because for me, they almost go hand in hand. Like almost always the wounds come up first and louder when we're on a healing journey, but that wisdom is just right beneath it, like really truly. And it's a wisdom beyond just like a mind intelligence. Like it's such a deep, true wisdom that comes from our truest essence.
That's so beautiful. And I think so many of us forget because maybe we're so like, we're working so hard on our trauma, we forget that even if we've had trauma, which most of us have, the
Yeah.
body's still holding like the truth. Like we still
Mhm.
feel our needs, our values, what's important to us,
Yeah.
everything is still there. It hasn't gone away.
Totally. Not only that, like it knows how to guide us home. It knows how to guide our healing journey when we know how to listen, which, sounds complicated until you begin to practice, like when we know how to drop in, there is just like this huge resource of healing guidance and wisdom that can carry us through in some pretty significant ways, I think.
Love that. So you mentioned feelings. That is a
Yes.
tricky thing for many of us for so many reasons because we
Yeah.
never learn how to feel our feelings. Because I feel like a lot of our traumas are when we felt feelings. It's not just the trauma that caused, an emotion. It's also how
Hmm.
we met in the emotion. And then whenever that emotion comes up again, it's all sparked again, like I wasn't met, I was all alone. So this emotion becomes very, very scary and overwhelming. And
Yeah.
so, how do we work with this?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of things to do, of course, but like I say that there are 3 R's to deep emotional healing. And the first is regulate, like anything that we can do to make ourselves feel safe, anything that we can do to make ourselves feel a little bit more connected to the present moment, like bring that nervous system activation a little bit down, right? Like that is an important piece of this because we can't really do deep emotional healing if we're wildly dysregulated. And the world is dysregulating. Like, so I think a lot of us are more dysregulated than we might consciously be aware of, which is totally fine and totally normal. But yeah, I usually start people with like, let's just regulate. Let's just bring some safety here. Let's just, like, how can we make your body actually feel like it's okay right here and right now? And so that's a big piece that is really important and meaningful. And then the second thing I say is let's get to the roots, like let's see is your leg broken? Is that why you're using the crutch? What can we do for that? Right? Like we have to get deep inside, like into and it doesn't mean you have to relive the trauma and it doesn't mean you have to retell all the traumatic stories or whatever, but you kind of have to like meet the parts of you that are still carrying the old wounds, like again, I talked about those vulnerable, confused parts or whatever within. Um, and then we can kind of reorient. So that's the third R, is that's where a lot of people are trying to do mindset work or cognitive work. Like they want to see things differently. They don't want to believe their limiting beliefs, all this kind of stuff. But that actually comes naturally after the regulation and the roots. And then we do have to kind of practice like embodying our own empowerment or like listening to our own wisdom or whatever. But the reorient stage largely comes after the regulate and roots and is a natural outgrowth of that, where I think most of our culture is just trying to jump right to reorient. Like, I just want to think different. I just want to feel different. So I don't know. it's such a big question that you asked about feelings, but that is how I begin to approach it is like, first, do you need some regulation before we even look at this feeling? You know, like, do you need a little bit more safety here? Because everyone is so wildly unique, you know, that like once we begin to unpack what they're feeling, like you said, maybe first it will be like the judgments or the relational traumas of being rejected when you had a big feeling, right? Or maybe first it will be just this like, clamp down like I'm not gonna feel that, no, definitely not feeling that, right? Like there's so many things that can come up as we begin to take steps towards our feelings, but yeah, that's like the framework that I usually start with. Is like, let's start with some regulation and then we'll just move a little bit closer to what is here, because again, the feelings are here. You are feeling them, even if you're not consciously feeling them, even if you're trying to shove them away. And so we actually have to learn how to come into relationship with them so that we can bring support, you know, so we can respond appropriately to them. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it was a big question.
It is. I agree. And it's interesting. We have such a similar approach. This is how I
Uh-huh.
teach about triggers, exactly those steps. And
Uh-huh.
why is it that mindset work alone doesn't work? And how is it like the natural, which I completely agree with, it's kind of the natural result of this process.
Yeah. Well, so mindset work alone doesn't work because we're a lot more than just our minds. You know, like that's another thing that we've been culturally conditioned to kind of believe is that we are our thoughts. Like we fully identify with our thoughts most of the time. Um, and everything else gets discounted. The emotions get discounted, the body gets discounted, the needs, you know, all that sort of stuff gets thrown by the wayside so that we can just listen to our own thoughts and identify with our own thoughts. But current neuroscience tells us that like 95% of our thoughts, feelings, motivations, and behaviors actually comes from the subconscious. And the subconscious is held in every cell of our bodies, right? And so, like, if you're only working with that 5%, you're not really working with like the depth of who you are. You're not really working with like the authenticity of who you are. And you're not working with where you can actually make the most change. Like when we come into communication with our bodies, when we learn how to feel, when we learn how to care for what we find when we do feel something, right? Like that's when we drop into that 95% that's under the surface. That's really actually what's in control more often than not. So yeah, mindset work just simply is not working with the true depth of who we are. And it's such a relief oftentimes to actually come into connection with that true depth. Like most of my clients and students are often people who can cognitively tell me so many things about their stories. Like they're so self aware and so intelligent and that kind of stuff. And yet somehow still stuck because, again, that mindset work piece um, just isn't enough. It isn't enough for like the depth of healing that we're longing for. And it's not enough to really transform the deep patterns that have been a part of our lives for so long.
I love that. Yeah. So if someone is extremely overwhelmed by emotions really trigger a lot for them.
Mhm.
How would you invite them to start?
Totally, totally. Yeah. So, probably starting with some body centered regulation exercises would be good because anytime we're spinning out, it means that we will benefit from some more safety, some more connection, that sort of thing. And then, really, one of the things that I invite people to start out with once you're finding a little more regulation. So, we'd start with regulation. Yeah. And then play with, if you can just allow the feelings, if you can just let them be, like, because our knee jerk reaction is to judge them, to push them away, to suppress them, to, you know, cut them out or whatever. And,
Fix
and that's
them. Fix them,
totally,
make them go away. Yes.
yeah, totally. Fix them, solve them, think about them until they go away, right? And all of these are forms of resistance. And if you like really actually notice the resistance, it doesn't feel good. Like it's what we've been conditioned to do, but if you actually feel it, it doesn't feel good in your body. And when you allow things, so I often encourage people to like feel it in their bodies, which I have like a series of questions that can just like help you feel it a little bit clearer, a little bit more, like help you attune a little bit more. Um, once you feel it in your body, you just let it be there. You let it be as big as it is. You let it be as, like, if it's sadness, like let it be as sad as it is or as sad as it wants to be. If it's moving, you let it move, because some feelings will have like a real stillness and some feelings will have like a pulsation or a vibration or something. And so the more you can just let it be here, all of a sudden you're not in that resistance anymore. And that makes a huge difference. So yeah, regulation, learning to feel it in your body, allowing it. And then, I would take it another step further to like really understand like what part of you is carrying that emotion and what is that part feeling and what does that part need. And I don't um pose it to my clients and students in question form like that, because that's mostly just going to be engaging your conscious mind. And you may not have answers, or the answers may not be fully like true of what the depth of you is feeling. But yeah, that is the essence of processing to me, is it's coming into relationship with the part that's carrying that emotion, and then really understanding that part, like letting that part be seen, letting that part be heard, letting that part feel like it matters and that you're listening.
Beautiful. And I think that even posing it as a part of you is carrying an emotion. It's already very regulating, because then it doesn't
Yeah,
over. It's like, okay, it's here. There's like one part that is sad. It's not my entire experience. So that already reduces the overwhelm. And you mentioned
totally.
regulating, and I think maybe some people have no idea what that entails. Can you give us
Yeah.
examples?
Yeah, totally. Well, so one of my favorite tools for regulation is called havening. So you've probably done it if you've done some of my YouTube things, but it is this really gentle touch that just helps our limbic system. It helps deep parts of our brain come out of the stress and trauma cycles. So, just to define regulation and dysregulation really quickly, dysregulation is when we're stuck in cycles of stress or trauma, or, something's going on that's keeping our limbic system kind of looping in anxiety or hypervigilance or defensiveness or whatever. And so it really is a state where we're just kind of stuck oftentimes, like if you often feel anxious or you always feel worried or, that kind of stuff. It's probably just you're stuck, like your limbic system is continuing to loop in that stress response. And regulation is when your nervous system can actually move in and out of stress responses. Like it can activate if you're in danger and then it can relax. So it's a state of like functional flexibility. And one of the things that's important to recognize about it is that we can't talk ourselves into regulation. Like we can't just convince our limbic system, with our cognitive mind, like just chill, you're fine, don't worry, right?
You're
Like
safe.
let it
You're
go.
safe. I'm telling you.
Right, totally, totally. And so I have a lot of different exercises that I do that actually have the body give feedback to the limbic system. You're safe. We're fine. And havening is one of them. So havening, it is just this gentle, soothing touch. You can just rub your hands together. That's one way to do it. Another way is to rub down your arms from shoulder to elbow, shoulder to elbow. Another way is to rub your face, cheeks, or forehead. And this soothing touch has been shown to send delta waves to the amygdala, and that tells your amygdala you're okay. It takes like 5 or 7 minutes for that to actually start to tell your amygdala that things are all right. So I utilize that a lot, but there's so many things. Like a lot of people in the trauma world are familiar with orienting, where you just take a minute and you look to, visually scan your environment and then you listen, right? Another thing I'll do when I don't want to haven or something because maybe I'm in public is I'll just feel the expansion of my ribs. Like I'll just feel the expansion of my ribs to the right and the left with every breath. And it's a very small movement, but paying attention to that interoceptive capacity, which is just feeling the feelings inside your body, is regulating. So there's a lot of different ways to regulate your nervous system, and they're all body first, because we have to start with the body telling the limbic system that we are safe, because our conscious mind does not have that capacity. And they're all nurturing on some level too, because we're bringing ourselves back into a place where we can feel like okay again.
Beautiful. And I really want to plug in your YouTube channel here because,
Mm.
when I started my healing journey growth, I would do so many meditations and they were
Mhm.
very heady, and I was like, why can't I meditate? I can't really meditate.
Right,
And
right.
that's why I love somatic practices so much. So even though your channel has a lot of, titles with the word meditation, to me, it's really like practices that get
Yeah.
to like shift your state and then give you like so much healing and truly deep insights. And I really love what you share. So please, everyone, go and practice these beautiful practices. Um,
Mm.
so kind of starting to come to a close, I feel like I know self-love is a big topic for you. And I
Yeah.
feel like we talked about it, but we never like said those words. What is your definition of self-love? And I also feel like it's thrown out there like all the time. Just love
Yeah.
yourself. It's like, I don't know what that means.
Totally, totally. It's so hard to know what that means because we think like it's like this warm, fuzzy feeling that we'll always have, or like the sense of confidence or having our own back that we'll always have. And to me, it's not that. It's much more tangible and it's something that can be created because to me, self love is actually a relationship. And the goal is to create a relationship with ourselves where we feel implicitly loved, where like we don't have to think about it. We don't have to do the affirmations. Like we actually just feel loved. And so there are ways to do that that are really clearly laid out by developmental psychology between like parents and children. And so I kind of draw from that. So I always say, like, you will never feel loved in a relationship where you don't feel seen, heard, and accepted as you are. And that's true of our relationship with ourselves. And yet we have been conditioned to not listen to ourselves. We've been conditioned to push away our needs and desires and feelings. We have been conditioned to dissociate and judge and all that kind of stuff. So we have been conditioned to not see ourselves and to not hear ourselves and to not accept ourselves, right? And so
Yes.
it's a practice of coming back to ourselves over and over again, to listening to what is actually here and what can I do to care for myself. Because there's this thing in developmental psychology called the attachment cycle. And it just reliably has been researched for a very long time. And when it's completed, they see that parents and children create really secure attachment. And when it's interrupted, it's not secure attachment. And so the cycle goes like this. The first step is a need. The child has a need, right? Like they need their diaper changed. They're hungry. They need to be comforted. They want to feel like they belong or, whatever. Some of our needs are like more tangible. Sometimes they're a little bit more, you know, like feelings based or emotions based. And so then the second step is that they make clear that they have a need. So it's usually distressed, like they're crying or something, right? And so then the caregiver attunes to their need, does their best. It doesn't have to be perfect, but they notice that there is a need and they notice that they haven't met it, and then they meet it. So it's this four-step cycle that's pretty simple, really, right? Like there's a need, there's an expression of a need, there's noticing and doing your best to meet the need, and then trust is created, secure attachment is created, right? And so I encourage people to create a loving relationship with themselves by learning how to attune to their feelings and needs, right? And it sounds kind of intangible, but when you learn to do it, it does create this inherent implicit feeling like I matter. I am listened to when I have something to say, right? Like, and so that is the practice that I use with my clients and students, is learning to listen, learning to attune, because over time, moment by moment, even though we do this completely imperfectly, it does create that space where you begin to realize that you are loved because you are being seen. You can trust yourself to hear, like it creates this really beautiful space where over time we create inner security with ourselves.
Oh, that was so good. Yeah, I mean, it is simple. I've never really heard it laid out so simply. And I think that my issue with this was that I thought it was all internal, but I think it also has to be our behavior. So, for example, when
Hmm.
we are around people that are really not aligned to us, that are not meeting our needs, that are just relationships that are really harmful or just not really fulfilling, and we keep
Mhm.
staying in them, I think that it really, really erodes self-trust. Not just trust in
Yeah.
other people, but like trust in yourself. And so to get there to the point where you're like, oh, I need to leave that or that situation or that dynamic or whatever. There's a
Mhm.
lot of inner work alone that needs to be done, but then we have to actually behave differently, right?
Totally, totally. Yeah, and I love that you're already having that, like, download. I mean, you may have already realized that, but this is also how we, like, figure it out, is step by step of, like, "That felt bad. Okay, what actually," like, "What do I need to do to take care of myself?" One of the things I often tell people is that that second step of expressing a need is almost, like, a little bit dysregulating. Like, it's like, like, for a baby, it's like, "I'm hungry," or "My diaper's wet," or "I'm crying," or whatever, right? But like this isn't like this happy dappy, like, I'm just always so loving to myself. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, this part is uncomfortable when I realize that, like, I actually let someone, you know, or I stayed in relationship with someone where I felt disrespected or whatever. Like, that step is kind of dysregulating. That step is kind of uncomfortable oftentimes. And that's like a real part of love. And that's a real part of being human, is like going to the discomfort, and being honest about it, right? Like, yeah.
Yes, and I think it's very dysregulating, especially if we're so used to our needs not being met most of our life, most of our
Hmm.
childhood at least, and
Yeah.
then our life, because we're like, this is how it works. I feel guilt or shame when needs arise,
Yeah.
and yeah, so this is really helpful. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you would add? I feel like we had a very comprehensive conversation, but is there anything else you feel like we missed?
Yeah, no, the conversation was awesome. Thank you, Marina.
Thank
And I
you.
guess what I want to like end with is just like none of us are doing this perfectly. Being a human is tricky and hard. Like that's why I love somatic healing, because it has helped me like get better at loving myself, and it has gotten me way more regulated and compassionate and stuff, but there's no like perfection here. Right? Like this isn't about one day I'm going to be 100% authentic and never feel pain again, right? Like this is like, as a human who is imperfect, who will make mistakes and does make mistakes, how do I show up in the most loving way, right? Like, how do I be the most embodied, authentic part of myself that I can be today? And that might be different than yesterday, So, like, all the things that I shared, I don't want them to ever sound like, an a really, really difficult high bar. Like it's literally just starting where you are and taking the next step with like a little bit more love or a little bit more regulation or a little bit more awareness, It's not a perfect thing.
Yes, and we are not perfect, and we are always, yeah, we're on a journey, and it would be very boring if we were not on a journey. So, what do you have going on? How can people work with you, find you? I mentioned your YouTube channel. What else?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Come follow me on YouTube. I would love that. My podcast name is Somatic Healing Meditations. And so you can find it on YouTube or Spotify or any of the places. Um, Also, I have a free mini course on my website called the Feel It to Heal It mini course, which is 5 mini lessons of how to actually put this in practice, right? Like, how do we actually regulate? How do we actually feel our feelings? Because that is tricky and confusing. And I like to break it down and make it really experiential, because we don't heal by talking and analyzing. We heal by regulating and processing and coming home to who we really are. So I would love it if you wanted to join me in the Feel It to Heal It mini course. Yeah, there's lots of other things. I have a retreat, a self love retreat coming up in Costa Rica in January 2026. And there are just lots of ways that you can interact with me. But I encourage you to find my podcast or join my free mini course.
I love that. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. I enjoyed it too.